to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City, September 11, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Freefall. Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Squarren, and I'm here with Andrew Steele. We're coming to you on the internet and around the world via NoLiesRadio.org, and we're also available on 911freefall.com, where you can tune in to all of our previous shows. Hi, everybody, and welcome to 9/11 Freefall. This radio, show, by the way, everyone, is committed to the truth of 9/11, and we are committed to the scientific evidence and the hard evidence surrounding the events of 9/11. We also are committed to exposing the official story narrative of 9/11, and we are committed to bringing attention to organizations that focus on the facts and the science of 9/11, primarily an organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. An organization dedicated to the pursuit of academic truth with respect to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center on 9/11. That's a lot to say. I say it all the time. Andy Steele, how are you today? Welcome. We're doing another show today.
Oh, well, you know, Bernie, I'm just so ecstatic and so excited, and I can sleep so well at night knowing now that the NFL referees are back.
All right.
Now, of course, I'm being sarcastic, but, you know, you would, listening to a radio broadcaster talk about this, about something that happened in a football game. I don't even know the full situation, but talking about this, you know, with the same passion that we talk about 9/11 truth, the same passion that an anti-war activist talks about drone strikes in Pakistan and all the terrible stuff that's going on overseas, really brings home to me what we're really up against. You know, and I saw a picture out on Facebook. I got with my other web page that I update, I got a friends list over 5,000 people. And someone had posted a picture, and it showed the football catch that I guess was the center of some controversy. I'm not going to just go into it here, but it shows a picture of that, and then under that it has a picture of a drone firing some bombs down at the ground, and it says, if you care more about this than this, then it's time to wake up. And really, you know, I put out that same message this week. You can, you know, obviously the drone strikes are an important issue. It's one of the things that woke me up, but also 9/11 truth is just as important. And so if you care more about what happened in a football game and what's going on in the gladiatorial event known as the NFL than the fact that Building 7 fell when it shouldn't have, then it is time for you to wake up. Now, the good news is, and we're going to be bringing the good news this week, is that people are waking up, and there's numerous instances of that, and I'll be talking about my own story, too, this week about an encounter I had with a congressional candidate that it was, at least for me personally, was very eye-opening, and I think I got through to this person. But, you know, so it's a good news episode, but we are up against a tremendously distracted public, a mainstream media that is distracting, you know, America with utter nonsense while the real issues, you know, are completely ignored.
Wow, absolutely. Andy, going after the sports fans now, I'm with you now. Obviously, you mean that in a good way, and I'm a sports fan, and I know exactly what you're talking about. You even you talked about gave the audience some ideas last time on how to flyer or do some sort of outreach at football games. But as a sports fan, I like to watch whenever I can a game. I'm a Giants fan, and all that whole thing. But I'm with you 100%, Andy. I watched, you know, when I do watch a game, I can't help but to admire just some of the commercials, not only for the military, just essentially glorifying war. And I get to see some of these games, and you know, we talked about some of these ceremonies at the beginnings of these games, and how they have these flyovers and all these military shows going on, basically defining patriotism as someone who's willing to go out there and blow up things up. So that seems to be the way they do things. But absolutely, thank you for that. People, you know, maybe I can get my hands on that flyer or whatever that is, or I like that idea. You know, what's more important to you? Even as a sports fan, I love sports, but I can tell you right now, the situation with the drones and the killing of humanity is much more important to me. So, all right. What are we going to do this week? I guess last week, Andy, we had Adam Taylor and his work and exposing popular mechanics and all their tactics. That was very enlightening. We want to thank Adam Taylor for coming on last week. For those of you who want to listen in, go ahead and go to 911freefall.com and listen to that on there. You can watch and listen to that show, or you can also go to noliesradio.org and listen to that show. We also... Well, what's going on, Andy? We have a lot of things going on in 9/11 Truth, and I guess we could leave it for a little after our moment of silence and talk some more about it, and then we'll go from there. So we have so many good things going on.
And a quick comment too about Adam Taylor last week. It's funny, just maybe by providence or something to that effect. I happened to have a debate with somebody about 9/11 Truth on the internet, and really all this person could cite was, just pasting a video of Jim Meigs on Bill O'Reilly. And it was coincidentally the same night that we were going to be airing the Adam Taylor's interview where he debunks popular mechanics. But, something that I find, stops a lot of so-called debunkers in their tracks. And I'm not talking about scientists, I'm not talking about people at NIST, but I'm talking about just your average rank-and-file person, is if you ask them, okay, you're defending the official story of what happened to the towers. Now, explain to me, what is the official story of what happened to the towers? and you get crickets. Because essentially what and I don't want to sound, I don't want to sound arrogant, but what I find is when you talk to your average person, most people, their explanation of what happened to the towers is that some planes ran into them, went boom, and they fell down. I mean, essentially that's it. Or they'll just copy and paste a YouTube video of popular mechanics or this computer model science, and basically think they can rest their case. And then when you come back at them and debunk that, then they just kind of degenerate into insults and things like that. But these are the questions we need to be asking people. We need to ask very pointed questions. And when I see people, and I'll be telling my story about the congressional candidate later, is when you confront these people, we need to ask them specifics and ask them, if you don't agree with the data, what specifically about the data don't you agree with? That's where we need to hit them. Instead of saying 9/11 was an inside job, and of course I support that statement personally, but instead of saying that or talking about some other side issues, is to confront them on very specific things. Why do you support NIST releasing its data that it used to create the computer models, the computer model simulations in its explanation of what happened to the Twin Towers? Now, these are very specific things, or ask them how that would jeopardize public safety to do that. And that actually brings the dialogue onto some very specific points that can be addressed out in public, and they can't just call you a conspiracy theorist and laugh at you, because these are, a legitimate point that they would need to address.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, one word I got from somebody one day was, hey, what about inertia? So, and I guess part of that is a joke. It was not really funny at all, but exactly, people will resort to certain coined phrases, something they picked up from maybe popular mechanic video or some sort of popular mechanic article or something. And I had someone tell me one day, "What about inertia?" So I said, "What about inertia?" Exactly. All right, so we're going to take a moment of silence, people, before we get on with this show. Obviously, you can see we've got a lot of material, exciting show today. So what we do, we take about 10 seconds of silence just to remember the victims of 9/11 and all the victims of 9/11, not just the families, but everyone who's been affected by the events of 9/11. So with that, we'll take 10 seconds of silence starting now. Okay, and with that, we're back from our 10-second vacation. We do that, of course, a moment of silence to remember the victims, to keep ourselves focused on why we do this show. It is as simple as that. 10 seconds is not too much to ask, so it just keeps us focused on why we do what we do, and really does help us to remember the victims of September 11th. All right, and with that, I want to remind our audience that the opinions expressed on this show belong to this show right here, 9/11 Freefall. It does not necessarily represent the opinions of other organizations that we speak about, in particular Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. These organizations have their own mission statements, and we do not speak for anyone else but ourselves. All right, and before we go any further, I'm going to throw out a question of the day. Question of the day, should popular mechanics be sued or disciplined for academic fraud? Why or why not? Right there. That's it. You don't think so? Tell us. Tell us why not. If you agree with us, then tell us why. I think they should be. They've demonstrated academic fraud. I always put out my opinion on these little questions, so there it is.
Well, my opinion is the same as yours. I mean, this is a mass murder on a huge scale that I think people lose sight of that. To a lot of people, and I guess, I was a young person when it happened. I was in my last semester of college, and so I witnessed it. But maybe even for the young people coming up, it just seems like something that happened. Just like when I was growing up, the things like like the JFK assassination, other world events, the World War II, are things that just kind of happened before I was born. They just kind of provided the backdrop to my current life. That's the kind of perception that you get, and I think that's happening a lot with the young people now. And so that's why it's really important that we need to hit this issue hard right now while the momentum is still behind it. While people who were affected by it, and watch those buildings fall, make up the majority of our American population, because as more time goes on, then we are going to have that window closing until, again, it becomes just kind of something that happened in history.
Absolutely. And, well, apparently a lot of people out there agree with you, because what we're going to do today, we've got a few segments we want to break up. One of them is we want to talk about how 9/11 Truth is growing. I call it, are we hitting a turning point? Question. So with a lot going on, and the people that are active, including yourself, Andy, and a lot of others, they realize that, and they're cracking that door open. So that is true that the longer we wait, the harder it gets. And you talk about everything you're saying, but at the same time, we do know that the truth is getting out there. People are becoming more and more aware of the world that they live in now, and I think we could not have imagined where we would be even 5-10 years ago, or even back in the 90s or in the 80s, for those of us that were around in those days, where we would be historically as far as the human consciousness and all the events that are going on in the world. There's a lot, so much of it ties back to the events of 9/11. That's why we do this. So absolutely, you're right about that. So, okay, well, Andy, well, we talked. We wanted to break this week's segment into a few things. A couple things I know that you brought up, and I know you have a story to tell with regard to censorship and just deception and all that. We have a couple things we want to throw out there for our audience. A couple interesting stories. We got somebody some chalkboard stories. We're going to get into. People getting in trouble for writing stuff all over the place, and 9/11
chalk terrorism.
Yeah, when it comes to these issues, we saw this with Occupy. You have people. I guess everyone has to decide where they draw their lines. Clearly, as you and I have seen, there are people out there willing to perform acts of civil disobedience to a certain degree, and then you have others who chastise those people who do that or throw stones at them, saying, well, they're breaking the law. So it's kind of like you have people that believe you have to do whatever you have to do to defend the Constitution, and then you have others who say, it's you have to. It's totally under any and all circumstances nonviolent, which kind of pretty much everyone agrees on that. But it's kind of where do you draw the line? So. We get into all these things with talk about chalkboarding the streets. Some will say it's illegal to do. Technically, there's a lot of things that are illegal. It's illegal to speak out against your government, too. So does that mean you're not going to do it? So then it becomes an issue of morality and conviction. So maybe that's what this is all about. And just to tell our audience, what the story we're talking about is a lady named Amy Larson was arrested for writing things like 9/11 Truth, 9/11 Truth Now, Google or YouTube WTC7 on a sidewalk. Now, whether or not it's illegal, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the statutes and the laws in this particular town where Amy Larson lives. I find it hard to believe that if there was, if somebody was drawing a picture like they do out in my, nearly almost my home city. At this museum, they have kids draw pictures on the sidewalk, very, very pretty art as you walk by. Obviously kids, play games and draw in there. I find it hard to believe that they would crack down on them, but you can see this kind of selective enforcement on political speech, and obviously we're highlighting this because it has to do with our mission of with her writing YouTube WTC7. But the fact that she was arrested over chalk, writing it on the sidewalk. I mean, the next rain will wipe this out. Goes to show just how ridiculous we've become. If it is a law, it should not be a law, but it's it's protected speech, and that's a sidewalk is a common area. Yeah, a lot of examples, a lot of things going on around the country. We can talk all day about these types of examples. So this is our censorship and deception segment. I know there were some other stories, and we're going to have for our audience. We'll have a link on 911freefall.com. Eric Douglas put together a paper, the NIST WTC investigation. How real was the simulation? Andy, you sent me a copy of this PDF paper. We'll have a link on 911freefall.com. It's from the Journal of 911studies.com. Eric Douglas outlines a list of items exposing NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and their computer model simulations with respect to the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. You don't want to get me started on that, but Andy, good paper. We can say a lot about this paper, can't we?
Well, we can, and just to give a taste, obviously it's a 28-page paper. We're not going to read this whole thing to you over the air. I'm just going to read you some pieces from the abstract in the beginning, just to give you an idea of what it's about. And it says, the NIST investigation of the WTC building failures was extensive, but NIST did not substantiate its conclusions experimentally. On the contrary, many of NIST's tests contradicted its conclusions. Furthermore, there are several examples in which NIST chose to manipulate input data and then certify its findings based upon the inevitable conclusions that derive from the manipulated input. One finds little acknowledgement on the part of NIST that uncertainties in its simulations translate into uncertainties in its findings. NIST's physical tests were inadequate. Then it says their ASTM E119 tests and their workstation burn tests were improperly modeled. Further, the former produced results that contradicted NIST's conclusions, and the latter fell far short of the testing performance of realistic steel members in actual fire conditions. Then it goes on in that paragraph, and just to say in this one last paragraph, there were also flaws in NIST's computer simulations, including its impact simulation, its fire loading simulation, its temperature mapping simulation, its thermal structural component simulations, and its global simulation. So, obviously the paper is debunking NIST, is debunking NIST's findings, okay? Very, very little experimentation. Even their own experiments debunked largely their conclusions. And I'd love to get this author on here to go into this further with our audience. Mm-hmm. But we're going to have that link to 911 Freefall and take an hour to read this. Okay, it's not written by somebody up on Mount Olympus that you can't understand what they're writing. It's obviously it's a scholarly paper, but it makes sense when you read it, and you'll see just how NIST has fallen short. And this is what people like Jim Meigs at Popular Mechanics are basing their own hit pieces on. This is what the goons at Fox News, MSNBC, CNN are basing their own official story. Basically, at its core, this was a failed investigation. It didn't conclude nothing. It was flawed. It didn't work. It didn't tell us what really happened. They just created a cartoon of the buildings falling and told us, to look at that.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't get me started on this. Cartoons and computer simulations do not equate to science. I don't know if we played it already. Maybe we'll have to play a clip from Shyam Sunder. I know we haven't done that already in a few shows ago, where they challenge him about this computer model simulation. Is this considered legitimate? And he essentially dodges right around the question. I mean, it is amazing how they've been able to sneak in this computer model simulation, and that really was one of the things that did it for me, among many, many other things. Just the thought that, I mean, people, for perspective, I want to tell our audience, we have the war in Iraq was based on the weapons of mass destruction lie. We know now that Iraq never had weapons of mass destruction. This is admitted. This is equivalent to that. I mean, we literally we went to war against Afghanistan based on 9/11, and now the entire story of 9/11 hinges on this right here, on a computer model simulation, people. Because without this computer model simulation, now they have nothing whatsoever. This is their evidence. And this is big, and that's why we talk about this stuff. I mean, this is incredible. You can't, I don't know where to start on this, but I've been saying it since the beginning, since we started this show, Andy. You cannot replace science and Newton's laws with computer model simulations.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that is why, we have this mission on the show where we focus on the science of 9/11. I mean, like I said last week, me and Bernie are not in a bubble. We know about all the other stuff that's going on with the erosion of civil liberties, the warmongering, all of that. But at the very core, at the very base of all of this is this horrible event, this impossible event. When you actually look at it, when you actually study it with a rational, intellectual pair of eyes, you know that the government's official story is incorrect, and you know that something stinks here. So this is why we put our energy on that, and this is why we're calling for more people to put their energy on that, because like I said earlier, when you focus on science, when you ask people specific questions about the science, and they're stumbling and fumbling, and David Chandler did this to Shyam Sunder in his video. You can see that where NIST admits free fall, and he asks him a very pointed question on science, and Shyam Sunder basically stumbles and fumbles over himself, starts to talk about gravity being a force on Earth. I mean, this sounds like a kid who didn't do his homework. But this is a government official, allegedly, that's supposed to be telling us how the biggest mass murder in U.S. history happened. We have a major problem here. So that is, that just brings home the point of why organizations like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth are so important to support and get their message out there.
Absolutely, and this evidence is so solid that is a big part of the success of the 9/11 Truth movement. Truth is something that can stand up to anything. It stands up to power. It stands up to ridicule and mockery and all kinds of stuff like that. Truth stands on its own. And these guys are constantly running from the truth. And we spent several weeks talking about TV pundits and all these guys. And Glenn Beck, and by the way, people, he has yet to get back to us, and we don't expect that it will ever happen. These guys are just mouthpieces to attack the truth. We talked about last week, Andy, when we had Adam Taylor on, and he and all the tactics used by Popular Mechanics, addressing all these different issues unrelated to science, addressing just using tactics essentially to discredit the messengers of the evidence that they can't prove wrong. Instead of attacking the evidence itself, they attack some sort of tactic or the messenger or all these different tactics that they use to discredit the message or the messenger instead of actually proving their case. So we've seen that over and over again.
And this is a political tactic that they're doing. Okay, it's something that if it like you see in the presidential election, they'll go dig out a video of a candidate from however long ago and try to discredit him this way, or then that candidate will fire back with something from this other person's past, or they'll try to do something that tries to attack the person itself. Right now, that's politics. But 9/11 is not a political. I mean, it has political ramifications, but at its core, it's a murder investigation. This is something that's bipartisan, affects every American. It's something that we shouldn't be playing games with. Mm-hmm. All right, but they are. They're playing games with it because they know that they're wrong. They know that their science doesn't match up, but they're trying to sell it to us. And when they can't do that, they'll resort to personal attacks. They'll resort to to like you said, trying to discredit whoever's delivering the message, and they'll resort to laughter. They'll do every kind of mass peer pressure thing they can to avoid what is reality, what is scientific truth.
Exactly. And to our audience, and in case somebody's wondering why there's so much to the story of 9/11, surely some people may occasionally come across this show and wonder, why don't we speak too much about the Pentagon or Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that whole crash, and why don't we speak about all these crazy guys that were arrested in the area, the so-called dancing Israelis, and you're talking about the explosives in a van, and you've got all kinds of, Larry Silverstein stories, and all this stuff goes on. And, we talked about the Pentagon. Those stories are incredible. You can dig into them. There's plenty of documentaries out there. Loose Change comes to mind, and a lot of other documentaries. That is not the purpose of the show. We are, as Andy just pointed out, we do actually focus on the science for a reason. And we focus on other elements outside of 9/11, and we will hit some of these topics perhaps that we've talked about, but we only tie it to the science. One thing I like to bring up, people say that, what is there evidence for? So I have Andy, a little question that I throw out there to others in the truth movement, and it goes to anyone. If any, you can challenge anyone to try and prove any portion of the official story, and you will have a very difficult time doing that. It's one thing to say, what do you have evidence for? You must be a conspiracy theorist. It's another thing to say to someone, hey, you believe the official story? Actually produce any portion of evidence for any part of it. And it turns out there's no evidence, or essentially zero evidence for almost any portion of the official story. And it's because of this stuff you're talking about, Andy. Constant dodging around. We haven't even talked about, there's so many things we haven't talked about because we try to keep it to what we normally speak about. But again, a lot of evidence being shuffled around, like the videos at the Pentagon. People talk about the Pentagon, and it's really the only thing that's important to know about the Pentagon is that the FBI confiscated all the videos that would prove their version of the story true. That's all you need to know. From there, anyone can speculate as to what hit the Pentagon. But why speculate when the actual proof is in someone else's hands? It's like saying, hey, I've got my hands behind my back. Why don't you take a wild guess what's in my fist? We don't need to play those games. So that's why. So we save our energy. We kind of focus on the things that we do know. We do. So back to point here, we do know that NIST got around and created this phony computer simulation, and here we are spinning circles when this organization has produced zero evidence for all of their claims, and their claims is the backbone of this entire movement. By that I mean the movement for the truth, I guess the anti-truth movement or the official story movement.
The lie movement. Let's just call it 9/11 lie. 9/11 truth. You got to have a combatant that should be the opposite.
Yeah, are you
9/11 lie movement?
There you go. Ask
Giant
yourself.
Thunder and John Gross and all them.
So we'll ask our audience. Ask yourself. We're asking our audience now. Are you part of the 9/11 lies movement? Because they've got a lot of representatives, and these guys we expose them all the time on the show. All right. Well, that's the censorship and deception, and we can go on and on about that. On the other side of the coin, we have a lot of people fighting for truth. Andy, are we hitting a turning point?
Well, we are. I mean, obviously, experts speak out. 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out was the most watched PBS show that week of 9/11, and that really says a lot because of all the 9/11 stuff that plays around that time. People are choosing to watch this. It's the most interesting. It's the most factual. Because it's experts speaking out, and it's people who actually know what they're talking about, pointing out the obvious. And I'm sorry, 11 years later, everybody knows this issue. Okay, if you're an American and you're conscious to any extent, you have to know about this controversy. Now, in the beginnings, when people were first talking about this, people may have dismissed this as just another conspiracy theory. But as somebody maybe showed you Building 7, as somebody showed you, this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence, then it started to click in, and it's made more people interested. Now, not everybody has chosen to make it their mission to expose this like we have every week, but people are curious. People want to know, and they see other things happening. Obviously, other world events have helped along people or helped along our movement in making people question their government and what's going on around them. So everything is kind of coming together right now into this apex where consciousness is raising, consciousness, not to get spiritual, but consciousness about truth. People are starting to see the world around them for what it really is, and they want to know what's been going on, for the last 11 years, what really happened on that day. Their minds are more open to it.
Absolutely, and you said not to get spiritual. Hey, my point is we are consciousness. That's what we are. And if someone doesn't think that they are consciousness, well, whatever, you can say whatever, but that's what we are. I'm not, I think that somewhere along the road, that's just whatever you want to call it. We are individual beings that have the ability to choose what we want to do. We have different facets of who we are. We're emotional beings, we're intellectual beings, creative, and we're capable of doing a lot of things. And we're capable of focusing our energy in what we want to do and say what we want to say. So as collectively, as a human race, people are becoming more and more aware. Awareness is a real thing, and because of that, Andy, we're susceptible, and unfortunately, the humanity is susceptible to being lied to being deceived, and to being lured and pulled in the wrong direction. But I believe that things work themselves out. I believe this is again my belief. I believe that humanity. It may take some tough times in order for humanity to wake up as a whole, depending on how bad it becomes. But at some point, we hit a turning point. I believe that change is already in process. I believe that people are waking up. I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're seeing more headlines with celebrities, political figures. We're seeing people that have just public figures that are visible public figures are coming out doing things, or these stories are circulating more often now. We talked about, Andy, how Jesse Ventura, Governor Ventura, went on the Piers Morgan show, and we played some of that here on 9/11 Freefall, and how the reaction of the crowd was overwhelmingly for the truth and for justice and against the narrative that is perpetuated by the American and at this point almost global, almost mainstream media. media, but particularly the American mainstream media and BBC and all that, the narrative that they keep is a very different narrative from what we know is happening in the world. So that was just one example that we saw how, and I think these examples, we have Ed Asner, I understand, recently just came on CBS and dropped a bunch of knowledge and truth on them, talking about the events of 9/11 and so on.
Well, no, you're right about that, and I think it's part of people, after 9/11 there was this whole patriotic hypnotizing of the country, where nobody, people didn't want to criticize their government after that, and that was actually part of the psyop, But it reminds me. I just go to a quick story. Right that day after 9/11, I heard the radio station played Let It Be. I think that's the Beatles or John Lennon that sang that. It's, something I always remember. It says, "There will be an answer, let it be." And what I translate out of that is, we were bloodthirsty to go attack Muslims the day after September 11th, right? But, but there's a message in that song, and that "Let It Be," there will be an answer. And the answer that has come years later has been 9/11 truth, because nobody knew the truth about it after that day. So it's kind of, this kind of supports what you're saying, is that if you give it some time, if you step back from the situation and actually look at it, get out of the emotion, get out of the moment, don't be stuck in the moment. If you actually look at it from there and give it some time, you'll actually start to see a different picture, a clearer picture, and this is the answer. Shows like this are the answer. The mass awakening is the answer. So it's almost like subconsciously or maybe cosmically or something like that. That song was telling people, when they played it on that radio station that day, to wait, wait, let it be for now, and then see the truth later on. But people are separating their identities from these political leaders to a certain extent. I mean, I can't say this about every single person. Obviously, we're still very divided, and you've got people, like this presidential election, where people really think that these candidates actually mean something and that they're going to change their lives and they're actually going to make a difference if you get a certain person into the White House. And so there's a lot of polarization there. But as more people separate their identities from their politicians, as they start to think of these politicians and these government people and these army people at the Department of Defense that were held up as heroes after 9/11, and they start to think of them more in the terms of like the guy at the DMV. He's basically just a civil servant. I'm not married to him. If he's complicit in murder, I want to get justice. As they wake up to that and they separate their minds and start to think for themselves, thanks to shows like this and other ones, we're going to start seeing this acknowledged. We're going to start seeing people take bold steps, speaking confidently the truth, and unapologetically sticking it in the establishment's face that, we know what happened and we're going to expose it.
Absolutely. I was thinking as you're saying that, how much time Hollywood and how Hollywood spends so much time, and in mainstream media, who we've exposed a few weeks ago, how they spend so much time making you feel comfortable that your parents is the government. You listen to government first. But I like the way something you said there, where the government goes from being your parent or maybe that warm, cozy, real close friend to being the guy at the DMV. They're not your mother or your father, and they are just this entity that exists that we created. People created governments, and but that's all right. People will bring governments down and will restructure and rebuild new governments. That's how history, that is the way of the world. All governments come down. They live for a while, and then they go away, and then new governments come around. This is who we are as humanity. So, all right. Well, I just can't... I must say that this awakening is clear to me. We're seeing a lot of stories, Andy, and we also, as you said earlier, we have the public is hungry for the truth. We have Colorado Public Television, 12 picking up the Experts Speak Out documentary put out by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. A lot of people are demanding this. It was, for several weeks, the most shared documentary on PBS. Made it to number one. They had to do some sort of maintenance, and it took the video down for a couple of days for some technical reasons, and they brought it back up. So that documentary is on PBS. We want to let people know this thing is starting a ruckus out there. Lots of hits. One of the most, I believe it was the number one most watched documentary there as well on PBS for a while. This documentary is creating trouble for the official story and for anyone who is caught up in the narrative that followed the 9/11 official story. By that, this idea that there are terrorists everywhere and that we're rightfully going to war, ignoring torture, and all these crazy things that have happened over the last 11 plus years. So this documentary is smashing through and creating a lot of problems for the establishment, Andy.
Well, we're in the business of making trouble, and we're going to be making a lot more trouble, and you can have fun and be with the cool kids by helping us make trouble, by spreading experts speak out and showing it to people wherever you go. And, your level of comfort when you approach people is up to you, but you don't have to speak apologetically. You have the permission of the mainstream. It was on PBS. That's pretty mainstream.
Right.
And oh, go ahead.
I want to jump in and interrupt you, Andy, and say, one of the special things about this whole event is that for a movie to get to number one in pretty much any entity, it's got to be obviously a very good movie. Usually it's associated with a something or a presentation, whether it's a documentary or a short film, for all the filmmakers out there. For films to be rated so high and shared, usually we saw in the past where it simply had to be entertaining or be intriguing or something like that. This documentary is an appeal to consciousness. This is an appeal to reason and science. Not to say it's not entertaining. Surely it is. But the reason it's number one is because it's appealing to people's logic and their reason, and it's creating an awakening of consciousness. Because when people look at this information, this is not intended for entertainment, although I'm sure, I watched it. I guess I was entertained only to the extent that I was intellectually intrigued. But this is pure call out to consciousness. This is reason, kind of like somebody cracking open a physics book or a math book and explaining to you algebra, and you kind of get it, and then that light bulb comes on. So that's what this is. The light bulb is coming on. People are waking up to the logic and the reason that of 9/11 truth science, realizing, wow, those crazy truthers were right. Every organization has a different way of carrying themselves with regard to 9/11 truth. We have We Are Change out there, where their focus is more of a political focus. So not everyone's going to be receptive to the We Are Change style, perhaps, and I work and have been a part of We Are Change for a long time, but people may not like a political message and may reject the message based on that. But when you're dealing with experts speak out, we're talking pure science. And that all those other biases kind of go away, and you have to confront the science. And so that's why we're seeing this awakening, because people are becoming aware of the science, which is, as you said earlier, irrespective and is not dealing with the politics of it or the propaganda part of it. It's just the science, and that's what makes it so effective.
Absolutely, Bernie. I'm going to tell my story about visiting a congressional candidate this week. Now, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to. It was kind of a private conversation, and I don't want to publicly embarrass him. He hasn't gotten into office yet, but he's a Democratic candidate challenging a Republican incumbent. And I heard that he was going to be having a town hall meeting and I thought, oh, okay, I come back home from my day job, but I threw on a tie, got an AE 9/11 Truth VIP packet, and a copy of the nanothermite paper, and I went down there, and I sat in the audience. I waited patiently for him to speak, and for him to finish up his whole spiel, and then it came time to answer questions. Now, when he came to me, I made sure that I stood up. I was the only person that actually stood up when he asked his question, and I told him, I represent a group of currently over 1,700 architects, engineers, chemists, physicists. I listed some other professions in that, and I said, who have studied the destruction of World Trade Center buildings 1 and 2 and 7, and have concluded that it's absolutely impossible without the use of pre-planted explosives. And I also mentioned about the international team of scientists that had found the nanothermite dust. Now you can see his face change just as I'm telling, as I mentioned World Trade Center 7, and he says to me, yes, because he'd been a congressional aide for somebody before, I guess. Right. And he says, yes, I've encountered your group before. I don't agree with your findings, but I won't shut my door. Because I'd asked him, are you willing to watch or review this information after the election? So he said, I don't agree with your findings, but I won't shut the door to anyone. Well, I kept my mouth shut, and then there was a portion after the whole town hall where people were going up and meeting him and shaking hands, and he saw me standing in line, and I could tell he really did not want to encounter me, but I held my ground, and I was the last person to talk to him, and I asked him, I said, thank you for taking my question. If you don't mind, but can I ask you, what about our data do you disagree with? And the first thing he said was, please don't do this to me.
Wow.
Please don't do this to me. And I said, come on. You look at Building 7. Do you really think fire brought that building down? Really? And then he goes off to list some kind of rambling, incoherent explanation about how fire caused something that he had heard on TV. And I said, every support at once, all of them, at the same time. And then he kind of, was quiet. He said, what do you think about Bin Laden confessing to it on television? I said, the same thing I think about them, allegedly killing him, tossing his body in the ocean, and then refusing to release any photographs or video of it afterwards. And he quieted down about that. And I said, I insisted to him, look, we're not crackpots. I represent a group of professionals that know the difference between theories and fact. Okay? And they have studied this, and this is their conclusions. And I reminded him. I said, people have died. Nearly 3,000 people. I looked him right in the eye. I said, nearly 3,000 of our people died that day. I've watched Bob McIlvaine, crying about his son Bobby, who died in one of the World Trade Center buildings that day. I mean, he supports our group and what we're doing, and a lot of the family members have the same questions we do. We have the support of victims' family members. And I stress it again, people died that day. And it was almost like, it's something I can't even really articulate in a written statement or in even just, describing it here on the radio. But it was almost like this weird connection. Like I had kind of reached him with it when I said that. People died. And I think people need that reminder, because, it's something that happened 11 years ago, but those were real lives in those buildings. And he ended up taking the information. Now, is this going to bust 9/11 or expose the whole thing? No, probably not. And I don't know what he did with the information afterwards, but this is an example of what we need to be doing. We need to be hitting the politicians, the media that refuses to cover this with very specific points. What about the data don't you agree with? Why shouldn't we test the dust samples for, why shouldn't NIST test its dust samples for explosives? Very specific things to make them address the actual science, so they can't just dismiss us with the typical arrogance and smirk and say, oh, it's just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. Because it's not just conspiracy theorists, folks. It is actual, if you watch experts speak out, these are trained professionals, and America is waking up. And if they want to be with the new political correctness, they're going to have to wake up and join the team.
Yeah, exactly. Good job there. So that is a lot. That's a great example of what you did there, that people can listen in and do the same, including myself, and that is quite a task and quite an accomplishment. So, were you able to get him in an office, or kind of just walking with him? How much time would you say you spent with this individual?
Well, the key was, I would say maybe a good 5 or 6 minutes after that initial thing. Now, we were still out in the general town hall area, and there were people around, and I think he was afraid of anybody listening in to the conversation. Now, something I forgot to mention is during this, I said, this is like, after he said, don't do this to me, I said, well, this is why I'm talking to you quietly right here. And I think that's a big point, because, I'm not, I'm kind of like on the fence. I don't agree that the politicians should just be treated with kid gloves and everything should be private all the time. But this is my first encounter with this person. I have no idea really what he stands for. I don't really care about the stuff he was talking about. There is no other issue but 9/11 truth. I mean, it's like the body beneath the floorboards we talked about before. But, so I wanted to be fair with him. I didn't want to publicly embarrass him, unless, until such a moment when something like that becomes necessary. And it's not that you're looking to publicly embarrass somebody, but it's but you got to hold them accountable. And that very first statement that he said, please, don't do this to me. Don't do what to you? What are you there for? This is, treating me like I'm the kid at a debutante party who starts, openly talking about dad's drinking problem at home. The mother's like, be quiet. You know, I mean, that's basically kind of what we are talking about. We're talking about a very negative reality, but it's not negative because people are waking up, and the fact that more people are speaking out about it is a positive thing. And as I said before, this reflects the real spirit of America, is that, you know, we can expose this. We can face our demons, and we can move forward as the country that we pretend to be in the history books and on TV.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you so much for that kind of effort. I'm thinking of the song you mentioned earlier, Let It Be. Let it be. There will be an answer. And part of that process is people like yourself and others listening to this show, going out there and creating that consciousness in the key people that are in charge and are trying to get in charge and are trying to make it to the top, just getting the word out to everybody. And we're going to wrap the show later in a few minutes because we are running out of time talking about that and the solutions. So, yeah, well, great story, Andy. Well, you know, it's always very encouraging to hear that happening, and that's exactly, we have to hold these politicians accountable. And you look at and there was a video that circulated just a few weeks ago. It was just a thought of it. It was Keith Olbermann being challenged on 9/11 truth, and just that look. I mean, I circulated the video to some of the groups, and Keith Olbermann is not so much the words that he uses. He says that attention should not be given so much to how the buildings came down, but more on who the perpetrators are. And we welcome others to do that. I mean, that's not necessarily what we do as very much, but there's some point to that. But again, just his reaction, his visceral reaction, you could feel that he was uncomfortable. He kind of understood where the person was coming from, asking him that question about 9/11 truth, and it felt like the individual you confronted, that why are you doing this to me kind of look. You know, he didn't want to answer the question. He's very, very uncomfortable, but he was careful with his answer. And that reaction, we're seeing that from a lot of public figures, that discomfort when you do challenge them about 9/11 truth, because they're going to have to take a side.
Well, the question I'd ask is, why do they want to be a public figure? Why do you want to be the guy, giving his take on the news every night? Why do you want to be the politician representing your district? Because a lot of these people and who they are. I mean, they're no different than you and me, but a lot of them just figure that they're going to go in there and they're going to just kind of sleep their way through their term, and maybe make some money in the process and advance their political career. But they don't, they're not true statesmen. They don't want to address the things that really matter. And I don't want to get into politics, but I listened to this politician, that I talked to in his speech, and who knows, maybe probably in a regular life he's probably a nice guy, but I'm listening to him say, and he didn't really say anything in his political speech. It was just a bunch of talking points without any specifics, and I wasn't really focusing on that, but that really essentially sums up what our government is now. It's just a bunch of talking points without any specifics. It's people who are just holding seats and, who don't want to be accountable to anything, who treat you like you're some kind of troublemaker when you are trying to bring attention to some very serious evidence about the mass murder of nearly 3,000 people 11 years ago. When I go to New York City, I live in upstate New York, so it's about a 4-hour drive to go to New York City, but I go there for events and things like that. And when I go there, I look up at the tall buildings, and I get vertigo just doing that, imagining like standing at the very top. Maybe not everyone's like that. That's just maybe my own personal thing. But then I imagine, what it would be like to stand at the top of that tall building and make the decision to jump out of it. Because there's fire behind you. This was a very serious event. I mean, imagine that building coming down on you. And I don't want to be graphic, and I don't want to, to get too dramatic, because this is, more of a science show. But, people, I want you to actually put yourself in their situation. Put yourself in the situation of these parents. What if that was your child? You would want somebody out there screaming their heads off about this. Somebody who wants to get at the bottom of this terrible event and find out who the real perpetrators were. What really happened to those buildings? Mm-hmm. All right, this is a very serious matter, and I think that's been lost in the 9/11 lies movement. The people who are just, and a lot of it's not even people who are lying. It's just people who don't want to deal with it, who don't want to, they're in positions of responsibility, but they don't want to be responsible. Well, we need to change that, and we need to make them responsible and hold them accountable.
Absolutely. Incredible. We do have to do that. A lot of people are doing that. These documentaries are getting out there, like Experts Speak Out, the 9/11 explosive evidence, and all this information is just continuing to grow, and that is a big reason why I feel we are hitting a turning point. We've talked about it, and with this, and we'll kind of start wrapping up. We just have a couple minutes left. The turning point is happening, I believe. We talked about other events that are happening. And we won't spend any time on it. We'll just mention it. A site called Truth Out. It's, I guess, they're. The website is truth-out.com, covering a big story there on, it's truth-out.org, excuse me. And a story, maybe we'll link that on 9/11 Freefall, talking about giving exposure to the 9/11 truth and to the documentary by architects and engineers. The Experts Speak Out, covering that. In the past, they haven't done that, so that's very promising. We talked about Rena Patty and Pam Senji going across the country in bicycles. Those ladies are out there. Let's not forget them. And 9/11journeyfortruth.org is their site. Let's not forget they are out there every day on the road. And that's got to be very difficult for them. At the same time, very rewarding for them. More, maybe if it is difficult physically, perhaps. Those things are happening. And we, as we said earlier, Ed Asner appearing on CBS, sharing truth. This stuff is everywhere. So people just continue doing what you're doing. If you're busy helping getting this truth out, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, well, get involved. Because we are turning the corner here, and it is a slow process, but we are getting there. We're, like you said, Andy, exposing this stuff and holding people accountable is what we're talking about here.
Well, you're right, and I think we've coined a new term here as the 9/11 lies movement, and I'm going to stick to it. And the 9/11 lies movement are the redcoats of this 21st century American Revolution happening, and it's not a violent revolution. I know that somebody might pick up on that term and want to spin it as that. It's an info revolution, and there's lots of different militias involved in it, different websites, different organizations, but we're all together for the same thing. It's truth, it's accountability, it's justice for people that died that day, and making America what it can be, what it claims to be. We can do that for the future.
All right, and I'm going to coin a phrase here, just to borrow off of you. I'm going to say, 9/11. Which movement are you in? There you go, something like that. So you're either part of the truth movement and science, or you're part of the official story movement with their computer simulation science and their pseudoscience and their all that. And with that, we're going to wrap up this show. So there it is, people. 9/11 Freefall, another show. We want to thank our audience for listening in. Again, we want to remind our audience to tune in to noliesradio.org and get our shows every Thursday night at 7 o'clock Pacific time and 10 p.m. Eastern time. All right. And there you go, on noliesradio.org. Want to listen to any of our archives, you can go there on noliesradio.org, or you can come to our site, and that is the 911freefall.com. And there it is. All right. Well, with that, we wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. This is Bernie Suarez again. I'm here with Andy Steele, and we are 911 Freefall. Take care, everybody.